We will have two members of our BUSSW community offer a 1 to 2 minute reflection about the talk and ask Lydia a question. Finally, we will be able to answer a few questions from our audience that you can type into chat. So first, just some Zoom suggestions. We will be recording the presentation, so if you aren't comfortable being recorded, please keep your camera off during the entire event. We will be posting the recordings on our E&I Speaker Series page a few days after the talk. All cameras should be off during Lydia's presentation and during the reflector's questions. You will be muted during the presentation. We suggest having your Zoom setting on speaker view. Please do not use the chat during Lydia's presentation, as that can be distracting for the speaker. And as noted in the chat, we have closed caption available for our presentation. And as the instructions in the chat, to use closed captions, you need to click on the closed caption button and choose show top subtitles for the captions to overlay. I want to take a moment and just acknowledge how hard the last few weeks have been. The violence of white supremacy and racial capitalism, and to send solidarity to everybody in the struggle. This past year has been a year like no other, with COVID-19 unmasking the devastating long-term effects of institutional racism, classism, gender equality, ableism. The timing of Lydia X. Brown's talk couldn't be more appropriate for our historical moment when we, as social workers, part of our world community, stand at a crossroad. To quote Mia Mingus, a queer, physically disabled, Korean, transracial, and transnational adoptee raised in the Caribbean, ableism is connected to all of our struggles because it undergirds whose bodies are considered valuable, desirable, and disposable. Understanding disability and ableism is the work of every revolutionary, activist, and organizer, of every human being. It is my privilege to introduce our speaker today, Lydia X. Brown. Lydia is an advocate, educator, and attorney addressing state and interpersonal violence targeting disabled people living at the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, faith, language, and nation. Lydia is policy counsel for privacy and data at the Center for Democracy and Technology, focused on algorithmic discrimination and disability, as well as Director of Policy, Advocacy, and External Affairs at the Autistic Women Nonbinary Network. They are founding director of the Fund for Community Reparations for Autistic People of Color, Interdependence, Survival, and Empowerment. Lydia is an adjunct lecturer, core faculty in Georgetown University's Disability Studies program, an adjunct professional lecturer in American Studies at American University's Department of Critical Race, Gender, and Cultural Studies. They serve as a commissioner on the American Bar Association's Commission on Disability Rights, chairperson of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice Section's Disability Rights Committee, board member of the Disability Rights Bar Association, and representative for the Disability Justice Committee to the National Lawyers Guild's National Executive Committee. It is my privilege to welcome Lydia.
Good evening. This is Lydia, they, them pronouns. I am currently in front of a room with has 2 windows with blinds behind me. I'm a youngish East Asian person with short black hair and glasses. And today I am wearing the shirt from the Disabilities Rights Center in New Hampshire, which was the cleanest shirt at the top of my pile of laundry. That is how I have been handling my pandemic dressing situation. And I don't know about you. I also appreciate and thank you for hosting and organizing, Lauren and Dawn, and for your introduction very generously. I would note that I actually do like engagement in the chat. For our presentation tonight, I welcome that. And I invite you, if you wish, to share in the chat where you are Zooming from and what brings you here tonight. As we begin, and I believe you should have the ability to do that, I will share with you a few slides, and I will be reading your messages while you send them. The image that you see on this screen shows silhouettes of people who have different bodies, shapes, and sizes. Some have mobility equipment. One has 2 crutches, one has a cane, a couple have wheelchairs, one is pushing a baby stroller, and one has accompanied by a service dog. Many of them are sitting, lying, or moving in unconventional ways, ones that are often considered unprofessional, disrespectful, inattentive, rude, ungovernable, or unruly. My favorite, the one that I've been telling everyone about for the last year, is the one on the left-hand side that is lying flat horizontally on their back on the floor. That person basically speaks to my soul, and I want to be with that person. That person is the embodiment of my last year of pandemic times, where I no longer really know what day of the week it is. I was in a meeting with my supervisor just a little while ago, in which there was an entire 60-second exchange where we weren't sure what Thursday we were talking about and what day today was. So that person lying flat on the ground is me. I invite you to move in and out of the space you are in the way that your body, mind needs and prefers. If you would rather be outdoors, if the outdoors is habitable where you are, then you are invited to do that. If you'd like to be there, if you have friends, partners, roommates, children, people who are with you that you actually like and you'd like to be with you today, then you are welcome to have them join you during our time together. Alternately, if you would prefer instead to be alone and you have the space to do that, then I encourage you and invite you to set that boundary for yourself of asking for this time and space to be alone. And if you have a kitty or a doggo or another critter who you love and you would like to be with you at this time, then not only do I welcome your critters, but I actively desire to see them if you feel comfortable flipping on your camera and you've got dogs or cats. In fact, I've put my cell phone number in the chat box, and I invite and encourage any and all of you to send me text messages, literally spam my phone with pictures of your cats and dogs, like literally spam my phone. I'm not exaggerating about this, like actually just send them to me, but tell me who you are too. I see that someone named Kat has an adorable doggo as a Zoom photo, so I approve of that greatly, and I would welcome more of your critters making an appearance if you feel so inclined and they are comfortable with hopping on. This is an opportunity for you to ask your body mind what it is that it needs from you in this moment. What do you need, crave, and desire? What have you carried with you into our space this evening? If you haven't had something to eat or drink in the last couple of hours, then I invite you to grab something. Hi, kitty. You are a wonderful kitty. You are the bestest cat you are. All cats are best cat. That is science. That is the bestest kitty. Michelle is sharing with us this gorgeous, beautiful kitty, mostly black with some white accents and the most magnificent whiskers. Your cat is excellent. I love your cat. Thank you for that gift. You are welcome to be on or off camera as feels comfortable to you, to move around on or off camera, to eat something, to drink something. Please respond to what your body mind needs. I invite you to consider what it is that you have carried into this space with you. Have you carried into this space your rage, your anger, your righteous fury or indignation, your devastation, your sense of overwhelm and despair, frustration, annoyance, your exhaustion or bone weariness, your grief, your sorrow, or your mourning? Have you carried with you into this space the weight of years, decades, centuries of trauma, exploitation, erasure? Have you carried with you into this space appreciation, gratitude, eager anticipation, joy, excitement? What is it that you have carried with you into this space tonight? I'm going to invite all of us to take a moment of pause, of grounding, to tune in to what our body minds are telling us about what it is that they need, about what it is that would hold our bodies with love, with care, for us to feel welcome, safer, belonging. Sometimes people like to close their eyes to do this. I invite you to do that if you would like, but do not certainly require it. But let us take that moment of pause and grounding together. Thank you for doing that with me. I am having the very fun April 15th moment of having received a tax refund in the mail yesterday and having to pay taxes today. So I received money, and that money is going directly back to the same government. And that is not fun. I finally get a tax refund and I have to pay it right back immediately. You know, so much for spending something nice for me. That's okay. The second note that I want to give you for our time together this evening is a note on content. The image on this screen is a silhouette of a person in a ponytail yelling into a bullhorn at the words for the content warning. I'm also very tired. I feel like most of us are. Please share in the chat if you are also tired. It is not just me, I hope. And so I am apparently having a bodily reaction of time to yawn. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, you can't take a nap yet. Why not? Because you're joining BU right now, so you can't take a nap. I'm like, okay, I'll nap later. During our time together, I will be speaking about some issues of abuse and violence in different ways. I will not be showing any images or videos that depict violence in any form. I will not be providing any graphic descriptions of any type of violence, but I will speak briefly about some types of violence in some level of non-graphic detail, including violence in the academy, violence in the family regulation system by police, and sexual violence. So just as a heads up, please feel free to take a break, to mute me, to move away from your computer. If at any time you need to recenter yourself, decompress, or reground, if you find at some point that you no longer have the capacity to participate or engage, then you are also welcome to withdraw from this space. I will not assume that that means that you hate me, except that as I tell everybody, you know, I have really intense social anxiety. So my social anxiety will assume that you hate me, but My social anxiety already thinks that all 44 of you completely hate, loathe, despise, and detest me so much that you all want me to get COVID and die. But that's my social anxiety talking, and we're going to tell it to shut up and sit in a corner and think about what it's done, because we're not going to listen to that today. It's bad and wrong. We're not going to listen to my social anxiety. I want you all to know that in this space tonight, I hope that this time can be restorative as well as provocative. I hope that this time will offer to you new ways of thinking about the world that we are moving through and what access and care can look like for us as communities and movements that are focused on liberation and moving us toward the next world, a world where we are not constantly under assault from white supremacy, from settler colonialism, from patriarchy, from capitalism, from ableism. A world where we might be held with love, with care, in justice. I want to start tonight by grounding our conversation in an understanding of ableism. And before I throw up this definition on the screen, I want to ask each of you if you'd be willing in the chat box, and thank you for the encouraging comments. I appreciate that. And if you would share on a scale of 1 to 3, how much you feel you know about ableism. So 1 is, I know a little or not much at all. 2 is, I know some. 3 is, I know a lot. Where are you? Seeing a lot of 2s, handful of 3s, mostly 2s. Someone put down 6. Is that like intentional? Can't tell. Just off the charts kind of answer. Okay. Mostly 2s with a decent smattering of 3s. No decimals. I'm very impressed. Usually I say this and nope, okay, there's a decimal. Rebecca gave the decimal. I knew someone was going to do it. Scale is 1 to 3. 1 is I know very little. 2 is I know some. 3 is I know a lot. I should really start saying 1 to 5 to give people more of a space for a little bit more numbers. But I like this 1 to 3. And the decimals are amusing. Math is not my thing. I'm a humanities person. I don't do numbers. If you leave the numbers to me, we're going to have some problems. There might be some sadness and woe, as in the sadness and woe of the IRS existing. I'm absolutely upset about this. I mean, what is there to actually love or admire or look forward to in paying taxes to a nation that uses that money to fund militarization, criminalization, war, occupation, expansion of empire, and deprivation of and denial of actual support and services and infrastructure? Taxes are not exciting to me, not given where we know those tax dollars are going. I want to talk about what ableism means. At its most basic, ableism is a system of values and beliefs, of thinking and doing that harms disabled people or people with disabilities. And I want to pause there for just a moment because everybody asks me this about the language choice here. This slide deliberately uses both identity first language disabled people and person first language people with disabilities, and that is intentional. Both types of language are rooted in decades of political organizing of actual disabled people and people with disabilities. Both types of language have long histories in our community. People first language originally came from the movement of self-advocates with intellectual disabilities, many of whom were institutionalized, sometimes for decades and decades, who were labeled medically with terminology like idiot, imbecile, high or low grade moron, feeble-minded, mental defective, and mental retardate as a noun. and in fighting against the weaponization of what were once considered neutral medical diagnostic terms, many self-advocates with intellectual disabilities responded by saying, we assert our personhood. We are people first before we are any of these other things. See that we are people, and then see what conditions or disabilities we have next. Identity first language arises in contrast from other parts of the disabled community, notably the blind, autistic, mad, and deaf communities, for whom our way of existing and being in the world is a core intrinsic and defining part of who we are. And as I might say, I will call myself a queer advocate. I will refer to myself as an East Asian activist. And most of us would understand, at least I hope, that in so doing, I am neither conforming to the expectation that calling myself that is a reductive way of reducing me only to my race or to my sexuality, nor is it implying that I am less than because I'm not white or straight or cis. So therefore, if I call myself disabled, why do we not apply the same logic and understanding? That to say I am disabled is also to refer to an intrinsic and defining part of my identity. It is not reducing me only to my disability, and it does not in any way imply that I am less than. Because if disability and personhood are not mutually incompatible or mutually exclusive, then why do I have to separate the word disabled from the word person? This is also a very English-centric conversation. In Spanish, to say that I'm an autistic person is persona autista. And to say that I'm a person with autism is persona con autismo. The word persona for person appears first in the construction either way. The same is true in Arabic to say people with disabilities, al-ashkhas, al-dhawi, al-yaqqa, has the word al-ashkhas for people first in that construction. So does to say persons who, like disabled people, is al-ashkhas al-mu'aqqain, disabled people, where ashkhas is still at the front of that phrase. Unfortunately, a lot of professionals, researchers, non-disabled people who hold those positions of power and authority will obsess over the concept of person first language and insist that it is the only respectful way to talk about disability. Literally to the point where I was at a conference and someone actually interrupted me and tried to tell me that I wasn't allowed to call myself an autistic person because, you know, it's a great idea to tell me what offends me about me. That's sarcasm. It's not a great idea. Don't do that. And I share this here because people always ask me about it. Identity and person first language were both and are both responses to different types of ableist ideas, values, and beliefs. In person first language, the response is to the idea that disabled people do not count fully as people. And in identity first language, it is a response to the idea that disability detracts from personhood or humanity. In other ways of thinking about what ableism is understanding ableism, situating it as a form of structural, systemic, and institutional oppression. That is, ableism is a system of power relations and power differentials, wherein those whose body minds are deemed as healthy, whole, functional, normal, sane, strong, stable, intelligent, and beautiful are granted enormous political, social, cultural, and economic power at the direct expense of people whose body minds are instead construed as sick, broken, weak, deviant, disordered, defective, dependent, unstable, crazy, dumb, and ugly. Ableism teaches us who counts as human and who does not. Ableism teaches us the bounds of who can be considered within the limits of personhood and who cannot. Ableism teaches us who deserves to live, to exist, to lead, to breathe, to be, to literally take up space, and who instead deserves to be disappeared, eliminated, prevented from coming into existence again. Ableism teaches us, in other words, what kinds of people ought to reproduce and what kinds of people ought to be reproduced. Ableism teaches us what kinds of people ought to be able to have children and what kinds of children ought to be allowed to be born. Ableism teaches us what kinds of people are valuable, worthy, and desirable, and what kinds of people are expendable and disposable. Ableism teaches us what kinds of people are human and which are not. Ableism is inseparable from, inextricably connected to, embedded within, necessary for, and dependent on every other system of oppression. In particular, ableism is virulently and violently racist and white supremacist, embedded within the logics of settler colonialism and empire. Under the ideology of white supremacy, both abledness and disabledness are always defined as against whiteness. Whiteness is defined as strength, sanity, health, intelligence, and beauty. That is why when white people are disabled, white supremacy teaches them that their disabilities detract from their ability to participate in and benefit from the institution and ideology of whiteness. This is not to say, of course, that white disabled people do not directly benefit from the structures and the power of white supremacy and white privilege, because they absolutely do, especially at the expense of disabled people of color. It is to say that white supremacy teaches white disabled people that in order to be seen as truly human, to be accepted within whiteness, requires them to hide, mask, or overcome their disabilities. Because of white supremacy, disability becomes both hypervisible and invisible in whiteness and in people of color, in negatively racialized and racially minoritized people. Disability becomes hypervisible for white people if it means or signals deservingness of access to care, to support, to accommodations, to services. On the other hand, disability becomes hypervisible in people of color, in Black, Brown, Native, Asian, and mixed race communities if disability signals menace, danger, threat, contaminant, or contagion. And disability becomes simultaneously rendered invisible in whiteness if it would have otherwise signaled menace, burden, or contagion. And disability becomes deliberately invisible in Black, Brown, Native, Asian, and mixed race communities if its presence would have signaled deservingness of access to care and support. Now, that care and support is always within a hyper-medicalized, charity and pity-based understanding of disability. But that positioning and framing is still necessary and essential for us to understand and to name. Ableism is particularly and violently anti-Black, anti-Native, and anti-Asian in this country. And you can trace that throughout the histories and ongoing legacies of white supremacy and colonization. The literal logic behind genocide and land theft of Native people's land disappearance, forced assimilation, and genocide is the logic of ableism at civilizational scale. The belief that white, Western, global North societies have to save, rescue, civilize, democratize, and modernize Black, Brown, Native, and Asian peoples' nations within and outside the borders of the US, that is the logic of ableism operating on a civilizational scale. The logic embedded within the construction of racialized capitalism, the institution of chattel enslavement, was a logic that literally positioned enslaved Black people as having physical capabilities that were desirable for performing hard forced labor while enslavement existed as a formalized institution. And after the formal abolition of slavery as a private economic institution, notwithstanding the continued existence of enslavement through forced penal labor, rhetoric instead shifted to position and describe formerly enslaved Black people, descendants of formerly enslaved Black people, and any other Black person existing within the United States as somehow more susceptible to disease or illness because of the lack of the presence of the institution of enslavement. And while the institution of enslavement existed, slaveholders literally would use diagnoses of mental illness as weapons against enslaved Black people who sought to escape to freedom or to engage in protest through diagnoses like drapetomania, DRAPETOMANIA, or dysesthesia ethiopica, DYESTHAESIA, AETHIOPICA. A trend that continued through the 20th century in the diagnosing of psychosis and schizophrenia in leaders of movements for Native sovereignty, for Black liberation, for Puerto Rican or Boricuan, BORICUAN, sovereignty, and continues to this day in the same rhetoric that has existed now for hundreds of years in our immigration laws and policies, constructing desirable immigration based on fitness, intelligence, health, labor, and production, highly skilled worker visas, student visas, in the positioning of immigrants, particularly immigrants of color, as dirty and diseased, rhetoric that has specifically followed every community of color in different ways, rhetoric that literally shaped the ways in which Chinese immigrants working as laborers were subjected to horrific working conditions, banned from bringing families as fellow immigrants, at one point subjected to the only law ever passed by Congress, banning an entire ethnic group of people from immigrating at all. Ableism and racism have always operated throughout our history and continue to operate today. Ableism and racism also operate in the ways in which we do or do not, the ways in which we fail or refuse to recognize or consider disability. We do not, for instance, tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities that are more closely associated with or prevalent in otherwise marginalized communities. We do not tend to think of as a disability the experience of postpartum depression in people who can become pregnant. We do not tend to think of as a disability the disabilities of HIV or AIDS that have long been associated with the queer and trans communities, particularly among queer and trans people of color. We do not tend to think of as disabilities like lupus or fibromyalgia that are much more common in Black communities, or even disabilities like Turner's or Tay-Sachs, TAYSACHS, that are more common in Ashkenazi Jewish communities. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities that are caused or exacerbated by the conditions of racialized capitalism, of environmental racism, of extraction, of empire, of war, of famine, of militarization, of occupation. We do not tend to think of as disabilities like asthma, cancers, or autoimmune conditions that are caused by deliberately deprived or neglected infrastructure in housing, sanitation, and land in both rural and urban areas, particularly where lower income Black, brown, and Native people live. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities caused by the ongoing, exacerbated, compounded trauma of occupation, criminalization, hypersurveillance, family separation, whether through immigration prisons, our jails and prisons, and the criminal legal system, through the family regulation systems, a term coined by Dorothy Roberts to describe the child welfare and foster systems, the ways in which trauma is caused and exacerbated in our medical systems, our health care systems, psychiatric institutionalization, disability, incarceration. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those disabilities caused by compounded community, collective, intergenerational, and historical trauma. The trauma caused and passed on through epigenetics, the trauma of chattel enslavement, the trauma of genocide and the Holocaust, genocide in Armenia, in Rwanda, of Rohingya, Rohingya people in Myanmar, of Uyghur people, Uyghur people in China. We do not tend to think of the trauma of occupation, whether in Puerto Rico or Hawaii or Palestine or Tibet, as being connected to disability. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those that were caused and exacerbated by US war and militarization projects throughout this entire planet. Bombing Cambodia, using napalm in Vietnam, nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific Islands where indigenous peoples live, and in the Southwest United States that is also largely more populated by Native people than other areas of the US. We do not tend to think of as disabilities those that are caused by a lifetime of impoverishment. I don't say poverty because that implies that it is passive or accidental. I say impoverishment because it is deliberate and by design. Disability caused by lifelong impoverishment due to deprivation of access to healthy, nutritious food, to school systems that actually provide education and care, to support against familial violence of people in all income brackets, people from all classes, the violence and trauma caused by childhood sexual abuse, by intimate partner violence, the violence caused by police, we do not tend to think of as disabilities, and yet they are. Last here on this slide, ableism is capitalist and it is eugenicist. Ableism and capitalism tie our value with our production. What do we produce? How quickly do we produce? How much do we produce? How frequently or consistently do we produce? How often do we produce? By what manner do we produce? And to whose benefit and to whose detriment are we producing? In 1927, the Supreme Court of the United States decided in a case called Buck v. Bell that forcible eugenic sterilization was not only not a violation of rights, but in the public interest. This was a test case brought to the court by activists considered progressive at the time, involving the sterilization of Carrie Buck, C-A-R-R-I-E. A white woman who was labeled feeble-minded, whose mother was labeled feeble-minded, and whose infant child conceived as the result of assault was also labeled feeble-minded. Carrie was sterilized, and the administrators of the Virginia colony for the feeble-minded, where she lived, sought to expand the use of eugenic sterilization by enshrining it in the law. Her case went up to the Supreme Court. In an 8-1 decision written by Oliver Wendell Holmes, the court wrote, and I quote, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." That decision has never been overturned. In fact, it was cited as positive supporting precedent in the Roe v. Wade case, meaning that the right to access abortion care is actually contingent upon the state's interest in upholding its ability to restrict reproduction of those it deems undesirable or unfit to reproduce or to be reproduced. Between 1927 and 1979, advocates have documented over 70,000 known sterilizations. It's only the ones we know about. Those sterilizations were largely of women of color, Black women, Native women, Chicana women, East Asian immigrant women, and Puerto Rican women. For one of three categories: criminality, sexual deviancy, or mental defectiveness. Three categories that were intentionally meant to elide clear distinctions because they basically meant the same thing. If you were presumed to be criminal, you were also presumed to be sexually deviant and mentally defective. If you were presumed to be mentally defective, you were also presumed to be sexually deviant and criminal, or to have a propensity toward criminality. All of these definitions, of course, fell explicitly along racial and class lines, imbuing and embedding the logic of ableism to uphold them. The image on this screen shows the word oppression in large letters and a big circle in the middle, ringing around it in smaller circles that are interlinked to show multiple connections are the words power, prejudice, bias, bigotry, hate, fear, and shame. Different ways of understanding how ableism operates and what it is. Ableism is systematic, structural, and institutional, but it is also intimate and deeply personal. Ableism teaches us to hate disability, to revile disability, to find disability disgusting, repulsive, and grotesque. Ableism also teaches us to fear disability, to fear becoming newly or differently disabled than we already are, both for those who are disabled now and those who are not disabled now, and to be ashamed of disability, again, in both ourselves and in others. Ableism teaches us that disability is always a sign both of lack and excess. Disability means we are not enough, and also that we are too much. Disability, or even the specter of disability under ableism, is something to fear, to disavow, to dissociate ourselves from entirely. We are led to believe that to be disabled is a fate worse than death. We are led to believe that disability is sad, pitiable, and also hideous and monstrous at the same time. On March 1st every year, disabled advocates host vigils for Disability Day of Mourning, in which we commemorate the lives of the thousands of disabled people that we know of. And remember, those are only the ones that we know of who were murdered by their family members or other caregivers. The website disabilitymemorial.org, I'm dropping it in the chat, lists the names of all of the disabled people who we know of that were murdered by their family members. They also describe what happened. I promised I would not share any graphic descriptions of violence, so I won't. But if you have the spoons and the energy to look at that website, and you do, you will read that the ways in which they kill us are often horrific, grotesque, unspeakable. And yet people try to tell me nobody really hates disabled people. They do. They especially hate disabled people at the margins of the margins, those of us who have experienced oppression because of class, because of race, because of gender, because of sexuality. In fact, we are taught to hate disability, to be contemptuous toward disability. It is no wonder that we each internalize those expectations, to find it embarrassing or shameful that people might think of us as disabled, might associate us with disabled people, might realize or know or figure out that we might be disabled, so many disabled people that I know, and I've struggled with this too, who have disabilities that might not be readily apparent, are horrified, aghast, or embarrassed at the idea or the realization that we might not be able to pass or mask as non-disabled. And that shame and embarrassment, I don't mean the actual anxiety or fear around what will happen to us in terms of survival. I mean the embarrassment derives out of our internalized ableism. We are taught to feel ashamed if people could figure out that we might be disabled in ways that we didn't broadcast or disclose explicitly. We are all taught to be ashamed of the ways in which we struggle, the things that are hard, when the reality is all of our capacities are constantly in flux and changing. We gain and lose capacities throughout our lives, as well as from moment to moment. I have friends now who live in Minnesota who are terrified that they might be next. I have friends with family living in Tigray, Tigray, who have not heard from them in weeks. I have friends now who have described their entire lives as already living in a post-apocalyptic scenario, because that is what it means to be Native in the United States. We live now in a world where all of us are experiencing the collective crisis of this pandemic, a crisis which has not impacted us equally or equivalently at all. And yet we are expected to be fine, to be okay, to keep working, to show up as if things were normal, to be functional, to be productive. And in reality, none of us can do that. None of us are okay. I don't know anybody right now who thinks I'm doing great, I feel totally fine. Nobody. My students literally have sent me emails in the last couple of weeks saying, I am in the ER and my best friend just died. Even though my policy is already that there is no such thing as late assignments, that my students can take unlimited absences and they don't need to explain or justify themselves, I'm still getting these emails begging for leniency. Because ableism teaches us that we do not deserve care. We do not deserve love. We do not deserve to be held with compassion or empathy. Our needs are not valid or legitimate. Our needs are always burdensome, especially if we are multiply marginalized. My friend Mimi Cook, KHUC, here shown as a Southeast Asian person with short black hair smiling outside, says, we live and work in a machine that requires us to be well, that does not allow us to be unwell, that punishes us for being unwell, and that asks us to punish others for being unwell in order to prove that we are well. The work of disability justice is at once a direct response to political systems that presume that our struggles, movements, and communities are separate, that our body minds are liabilities that undermine and delegitimize the cause, and offers us a vision and a path for building and moving forward. The first principle of disability justice is outlined by Patricia Byrne, B-E-R-N-E, Aurora Levins Morales, Levins is L-E-V-I-N-S, and others, is intersectionality. As Audre Lorde taught us, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. If you did not know, Audre Lorde was not only famous as a queer, Black, feminist scholar and advocate, she was also disabled. She understood intimately the ways in which gender, class, race, and disability have always intersected. The disability justice principles conclude with our interdependence as a value in and of themselves and as one necessary for collective liberation. Disability justice asks us how we can achieve liberation if we do not work to honor our own body minds in the process, and to create spaces and ways of doing work and relating to work that enable us to honor and attend to our body minds and their needs. The work we are doing, we are in it for the long haul. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." My work is informed by the Jewish value tikkun olam, Tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. What does it mean for us to think of our work as repairing the world, moving the arc, bending that arc closer toward justice? Dr. Cornel West offers us, justice is what love looks like in public. If justice is what love looks like in public, and it is our responsibility and duty to bend that arc toward justice, and as Asada Shakur reminds us, to love and protect one another, then how do we do that? Disability justice is our roadmap. It is our vision. It is our futurity. How can we move toward our justice and our liberation? How can we move toward love and care for each of us? We are at a time where celebrations recently concluded for Nowruz, Persian New Year, for Passover, a celebration and feast of liberation, and now of the New Year, Vishu, V-I-S-H-U, Sinhalese New Year, Kerala, K-E-R-A-L-A New Year. We are moving towards summer. The Western calendar observed Easter, an opportunity for new beginnings. The Eastern calendar observes Easter in just a couple of weeks. What does it mean for us to consider disability justice at this time of renewal, celebrations of what is to come, of a move toward rest as liberation? I leave these last two questions here. How do we honor our needs for rest, care, and love? And how, more importantly, and of necessity, do we build, demand, and sustain the conditions, resources, and infrastructure necessary to receive and offer rest, care, and love in community? This is the work of disability justice and the work that I hope you will join me in. Thank you for your time. I also apparently am supposed to be part of a panel discussion that starts like now, allegedly. But I'm glad to have had this time with you. I will ask you if you would like in the chat box to share a head, heart, and body. I will type what that is. Head is what is something you've learned. Heart is what is something you're feeling. And body is what is an action you can take with what you've learned.
I know, Lydia, you mentioned that you need to go to your panel discussion. So if anyone wants to put in the chat very quickly, oh, there's some stuff coming in there. Heart is feeling full and full of inspiration. Bucks versus Bell decision that was cited, renewed inspiration for the intersectional analysis. so much about systemic ableism. I am totally going to share this recording with my friends and colleagues if allowed. Share this information with others, research more. I'm going to share this with my supervisor about injustice. Yeah. So it seems that you have touched all 46 of us, and we want to thank you for that, Lydia. As we say in Spanish, que te vaya bien, may you go well.
Igual.
And this concludes our final Equity and Inclusion speaker series for the year. Next year, we will be starting up again in September. We want to see you then. I want to give a special thanks to Lydia for an amazing, inspiring presentation and connection, to our reflectors who were reflecting as you were talking, to our scribe that was working in the closed caption to make sure everything was right and perfect, to Lauren and Greer, our amazing students, for all the behind the scene tech, and to all of you for coming here and being in community.